All right, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our training on bills that passed this legislative session dealing with water and water conservation. We'd like to welcome everybody that's here in person, a handful of you that braved the beautiful spring weather to be here in person, and then all of you who are here online. If there's anything good that came out of the pandemic, it's probably the fact that we allow more people to attend meetings from across the state. So thank you all for being here. We have a couple of presenters here today that are much more expert in water than I am. So the good news is you don't have to listen to me speak about water, but we have people who actually know what they're talking about. And I guess I should introduce myself for those of you who don't know me. My name is Justin Lee. I'm the Director of Government Relations here at the League of Cities and Towns. So our first presenter is Joel Williams. He's the Deputy Director for the Division of Water Resources. And I know his division is very busy after this last legislative session. I talked to his boss a couple of weeks ago, and I think Candace told me you are doing something like hiring 6 new people based on all the bills that have passed to deal with grants, to deal with new programs, a lot that's going on. So big session to do with water, and the Division of Water Resources is certainly going to be keeping busy. And unfortunately, I'm not sure this year looks like it's going to alleviate that too much. So we'll first hear from Joel Williams, and then we'll turn the time after that over to Mark Stratford. If you have questions, feel free to raise your hand if you're here in the room, and we'll bring the microphone to you. If you have questions, also feel free to put those in the chat in Zoom online, and we will either read those up here at the podium or Carson will read them out for us. So with that, Joel, I'll turn it over to you.
Good to be with you all today. I think the term expert probably doesn't apply here. I feel like I'm kind of new at what I'm doing. I became deputy director just weeks, maybe a couple months ago. And part of that job was being the legislative liaison. And so this was the first legislative session that I followed this closely, and it was pretty exciting. I think half the time I sat there kind of aghast at thinking, this is how our laws are made. And then the other half the time being like, this is so cool. This is democracy, people debating and public input. And so it was this interesting mix. I actually am looking forward to next session already. Maybe it'll wear off over time, but it was a fascinating process. And I've enjoyed my time at the division. I've been there for almost 15 years. I spent most of my time in the project funding section, kind of working with project sponsors. And I will talk a little bit about that, because I know we've worked with many of the cities and towns, many of you that have probably worked with the board for getting funding on projects. The mission of the Division of Water Resources is to plan, conserve, develop, and protect Utah's water resources. And it's fun to work in an office that has to cover all of that, because sometimes there are conflicts between development versus conservation. But it's fun to be at the forefront of all of this exciting water. I knew that it would always be an exciting career. I didn't know if we'd be getting so much attention, and part of the reason why this presentation was titled The Year of Water, I believe it was one of the legislators that said, boy, there are just so many water bills. This is like the year of water. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. The division, we're celebrating our 75th anniversary this year. We were established back in 1947 with the Utah Water Power Board, which later became the Board of Water Resources. And our director, Candace Hassenjaeger, thought it might be interesting to look at a hydrograph over the 75 years. And so maybe it's the engineers in us, but we can really geek out about studying a hydrograph. And I think there's a lot in this little story here. Some of you may have lived through many of these years. My dad is 74, and he's seen all but one of these years in his life. The ones that stand out, you can see the 80s, 83, 84, 82, 83, 84, 85. This graph is basically just showing inflows into Great Salt Lake. I should have said that first. So it's not necessarily trying to give it an entire water picture for the state, but this was just one point that we thought was interesting and relevant to where we live, is the water that flowed into Great Salt Lake. I remember those years. I was 4 years old in 83, and we sandbagged our house. And for me, I just thought it was exciting because we were turning our house into an army fort, and I was thrilled. not knowing probably the peril that potentially faced us. I lived across the street from the Provo River, and at the time they thought it would overtop its banks. It actually didn't, but we know a lot of the waterways up here did. City Creek and the Great Salt Lake just going out of control. To go from that to now, here we are 40 years later, to the Great Salt Lake being the lowest level ever recorded. And it's wild. I mean, I think maybe a cardiologist would look at this and say, okay, it's irregular, but there's still a heartbeat. We still have life. As a hydrologist, you look at it and you do wonder a little bit, what's next? I can look at this and think, we're due for another wet one, another wet period. And some of us were hopeful this year when October started out and we had some really good snowstorms. The ground was saturated and we just thought, oh, this is the best beginning to a water year we could ever hope for. And then November was a dud. And then December gave us some more hope. Okay, maybe we can get back to normal and maybe even have a better than normal year. And then January was a dud, and we've kind of had enough duds throughout the months that we were a couple weeks ago, we were sitting at like 80, maybe 88% of normal, which sounds okay. And then we had that warm weekend and we lost 10% of our snowpack in one weekend. And it's looking like we'll get some runoff. Last year, we hardly had any runoff. This year, we should have some, but it is not what we'd hoped. And partly, I think last year is what got so much attention from elected officials, from the legislature. Drought was on people's minds. And I think that is partly why we had this year of water, as we call it, with so many bills. We were tracking 34 water bills through the legislative session, and all but 7 of those passed. It was, I can't speak to like years of experience watching the legislature, but from what I hear, it was an unprecedented level of attention and funding that went towards water. We at the Board of Water Resources have a long, proud history of providing funding for water projects. And so if you can see on the map, I've always liked that map. It has a little yellow dot everywhere the board has funded a project. And there's 1,500 of those projects across the state that we've funded since 1947. The total is $920 million in funding that the board has provided. And when you consider the total project value, meaning the amounts that the project sponsors would have put in themselves, the total is $2.3 billion. I think that's a pretty proud legacy of water projects, anywhere from farms to towns to cities to dams. It's been a fun legacy to be a part of during my career, and one that I hope continues. And I think some of this funding that we have received will ensure that this does continue. One thing I wanted to make sure that all of you were aware of is our open water data website. It's something that we've wanted to try to make sure this information is available, and we're surprised how many people still don't know that it's there. So our website is water.utah.gov, and that's the only website you need to know for everything I'm going to talk about today. So any project applications looking for funding, or if you are looking for data, if you're looking for information on some of the bills we're going to talk about today, like secondary metering or turf replacement, that's going to be the go-to website for all the information. But some of the things that you might be interested in on the Open Water Data website is the land use data. We go around, it used to be kind of an in-person deal, employees hopping in vehicles and driving around the state to catalog what types of crops do we have. This field is this, and that field is this, and this one appears to be wheel line, and this one's a center pivot, and that one must be dry farm. And trying to get a feel for what is the water-related land use throughout the state. Now we are able to use satellites to help us with a lot of that. It's amazing that from a satellite you can get very good at telling even crop types. And so that information is available, and might be interesting to just get a feel for what types of crops are being grown on the farmlands in your areas. The municipal and industrial water use, that's something that we have been tracking. The information is actually, as you probably know, you're required to report it to the Division of Water Rights. They receive that information. We then take it and try to make it publicly available so that municipalities can see what their water use is year to year to year. and be able to kind of maybe even look at other municipalities or look at regions as a whole. So there's a lot of good information in there regarding water use and water data. And then the water budget, just like you might have a financial budget for your city or town, what's coming in and what's going out, we do a water budget, what water is coming in. And as you know, on a year like this year, it's something that people are watching very closely. How much water is going to be coming in? Is it going to be enough to get us through, say, an outdoor watering season? Is it going to be enough to get us through an irrigation season? And knowing where that water goes. So a water budget is something that we're trying to make more available. As you can see, the 2019 data, it should be available soon. There won't be as much historical data there. It's something that we're trying to update the models to be more accurate and more useful. But we wanted people to know that this is on there. There's also just an interesting link to Utah aqua spots, where we have a geologist in our section that goes around and kind of just tries to highlight unique water features in Utah. And sometimes that's interesting. You might find a spot in there and think, oh, I've never been there. Didn't know that existed. I'm going to go on a field trip, take the kids. So a lot of information that we're trying to make available. I'll go back to the funding slide for just a minute, just to talk about what funding is available. The board has funding. We can work with cities and towns for drinking water projects, water storage projects. We've built water tanks. We work with irrigation systems, whether it be a secondary watering system or even farmland. We've done dams, dam safety projects, upgrades. We've even done water reuse projects where cities are looking to reuse, put some of the wastewater that they've treated, be able to put that into a reuse. So we've done quite a lot of projects, and that funding is available. There's an application on the website, and it's 2 or 3 pages. So we try to make it easy. And one nice thing about this is it's all state money. So a lot of the federal requirements that come in with some of the other funding agencies like drinking water or water quality, a lot of those are federal funds and they've come with federal requirements. This is all money that was started by the legislature, put into this revolving fund, and it's just continued to revolve and go out to loan on a project, come back and go out to another. And so it's state money. It doesn't carry a lot of the federal requirements, and we do. It's low interest rate loans. So a lot of people say, oh, can we get a grant? Can we get a grant? The answer is no. It's for typical projects, it's always a loan, but we do focus on low interest rates, trying to make it affordable. And the board is really good about working with municipalities to try to make sure this isn't something that's going to cause them financial hardship, to make their repayment such that it'll work for them. So if it's something that you've got a project in mind, wondering if we could help you, give us a call, put in an application, and we'll get talking with you. I'll now skip ahead to talk a little bit about some of our conservation programs that cities and towns would be interested in. We have, you've probably seen the Slow the Flow campaign. That's been around for years. We've got billboards up right now, and the focus is Wait to Water. It's April. We know that some folks, maybe you have neighbors that have already turned on their sprinkler systems for the year, thinking, oh, I saw the sun come out, let's get the sprinkler system fired up. And we're trying to get the message out, no, now is not the time. Your lawn is going to be just fine. There's still plenty of water in the ground from the winter. Wait to water, because for an average sized lot, say a 1/5 of an acre, 1/4 acre lot, one watering cycle uses about 3,000 gallons of water. And so if you can get someone to wait a week, 2 weeks, a month, I think we're hoping people maybe next month, May, they start thinking, oh, now it's time to fire up the sprinkler system. It's getting hot. If we can get people to wait, that you can have most of your water savings in the spring and then again in the fall, getting them to wait before they turn their system on, and then getting them to turn their system off in the fall when really the lawn is going to be just fine through the rest of the season. So one thing is over here on the right side of the screen, the weekly lawn watering guide. Every Friday we update this guide that shows how many days in the coming week do we recommend you watering, and that is based on anticipated precipitation and evapotranspiration rates. So we're looking at temperature, we're looking at cloud cover, how much does your lawn actually need, and it's based on regions. As you can see, the example that I'm showing here is probably, this wasn't last year, because we know last year with the governor's recommendation to only water twice There was a special guidance for last year to get us through, but this would have been the year before that, probably spring or fall, when northern Utah was saying, hey, you can get by with 1 irrigation this week. Most of the state was in the 2 irrigation zone, saying you probably want to set your sprinklers to go off twice this week in order to maintain your lawn. Washington and Kane counties, they were recommended 3 irrigations. And so it's interesting, and I try to do this. I still don't have one of the smart timers yet. I have to go out and manually do my sprinkler timer, but I do try to adjust it according to this guide. Look at it and say, okay, how many times do we need this week? And I was surprised, even last year, with the drought recommendation from the governor to say, hey, only water twice a week. I was surprised how well a lawn can do. I mean, we all hopefully saw some yellow, and maybe those were like little badges of pride there, like, hey, I'm doing my part. But you know, I think we tend to overwater in the state, and I know there's people that think, oh, I need to have that system come on. Sprinkler system needs to come on every day, and really it doesn't. 3 times a week would maintain a healthy lawn, even in the middle of summer. And even some of us saw that 2 times a week, as we did last year, still can help a lawn survive. So the lawn watering guide, in the very center, you see the Utah Water Savers. This is something we hope everybody knows about. That's where you go to get your toilet rebates. You can go and get a smart controller rebate that almost pays for the entire cost of the controller. And I've stood in Home Depot looking at them, trying to pick which one do I want. And I just haven't pulled the trigger yet, because I'm one of those, like, if the one I have is still working, like, I'm kind of waiting for it to break or something, and then I'll get a new one. But yeah, you can go in, and they tie in automatically to weather, so it'll shut it off if it rains. It can adjust it automatically based on evapotranspiration rates. So they're really cool, these smart timers. And then the thing I would be most jealous of is that you can control them from your phone. So say you're away from your home and you remember, oh, I forgot to make, I don't want the sprinklers to go off tonight. You can just turn them off on your phone from wherever you're at, even out of the country. And that's a pretty cool feature. So those are available on the Utah Water Savers website. We see a lot of rebates for those. If your toilet is older than 1995, then you can get a $100 rebate to replace your toilet to a water efficient one. And again, those are surprising how it can be more efficient, but also provide a better flush. And then Utah Water Savers is also where we will put the turf rebates. We'll talk a little bit about that with House Bill 121 this year. We did get some funding to provide money for people to remove grass and put in drought-resistant landscaping. When we get that program ready, it will be through the Utah Water Savers website on there. So a lot of cool links on here. Maybe you've seen the H2 oath, where we encourage people to go onto the website and look at, it has a whole list of suggestions of ways that you could conserve water, and ask you to check off 2 or 3 of them to say, oh, I could do that one, I could do that one. And then sign your name at the bottom and say, I took the H2 oath. And we've had fun promoting that on college campuses, trying to get people to be more mindful of just ways they're using water each day. And then the competition is seeing who can get the most students at their school to sign up. And I know Utah State won one year, Dixie won one year. So it's just fun to encourage people to take the H2 oath. And then we've probably directed some people to you through that Hall of Fame or Shame. It was a portal set up so that people could either compliment their neighbors or report them if they feel like there's, this sprinkler head that's been broken for weeks and it's just shooting out into the road. And so, they often say, how can we make that known? One way is you can just talk to your neighbor. If you go say, hey, did you know that sprinkler head's shooting off into the street? You can also file a complaint or a compliment with Utah Hall of Fame or Shame. What we do then is if we were to receive that, we'd say, oh, that's in West Jordan. We'll report this to West Jordan and let them know. And so they would get an email from us and with the address that was reported, and they could go out and take a look at it or encourage that homeowner to get that broken sprinkler head fixed. So maybe some of you have had some interactions with that. We've got kind of interesting mixed feedback on it, but we think there is something useful about having a tool where people can make such reports if they want to, and we do get those frequently. There were a lot of them last year. And then we try to be active on Facebook and social media just to have a presence and let people know about the conservation that we're trying to promote. So some of you have also probably heard about the regional water conservation goals. A few years ago, we were tasked with developing regional goals. You might recall with Governor Herbert, he set a goal to reduce our water use by 25% by 2025. And that was a big, easy to remember, 25 by 2025. And we worked with a lot of the municipalities to try to look for ways that they could do this. Washington County was the first area in the state to achieve their 25%, and they did it very early on. I think it was like 2015 or something. And then they continued to work on conservation beyond that and reached 2030, or they reached a 30% conservation. We realized that it's kind of going to be different for every region. There might be areas in northern Utah where maybe their goal should be different than someone who's in Kane County, or somebody on the eastern part of the state would be different than somebody over in Sevier County. So we wondered about this concept, and then when we were asked to do it, we got a consultant and we started looking at how we could break this state up into regions, and we ended up with 9 regions and coming up with a conservation goal that made sense for each region, considering what their annual precipitation was, what their elevation was, what their lot sizes tend to be, what their water availability was, how close were they to facing shortage, and kind of trying to consider all that and setting a goal for each region. Those are all available on our website as well. You can go see what is the regional goal for your area. Those 9 areas are all broken down by county, so it should be fairly easy to figure out which one you're in just based on the county. And say, hey, what is our goal? We'll talk a little bit about some of the bills that passed this legislative session, because 2 or 3 of them did mention specifically these regional water conservation goals. And I think legislators are looking to cities and towns to try to focus on achieving these goals. We know that water is going to be tight going forward, and wanting to try to make sure we're using it wisely. And so on there'll be suggestions about what kinds of efforts could we make to achieve these goals, and what level of effort do we, depending on how aggressive you want to be, there's going to be different recommendations. So that's one we'll talk a little bit more about. I also couldn't give a presentation without mentioning what we're seeing on the Colorado River right now. Lake Powell is 24% full, which means 76% empty. And we're seeing some dramatic photographs as people go to places that they frequent there and say, this is what it used to look like, and this is what it looks like now, with a lot of exposed dry beach and not a lot of water. And you probably read articles that there's concern about reaching the power pool elevation, at which Glen Canyon would no longer be able to generate power. And so Colorado River alone has gotten a lot of people's attention. And I think this is part of the puzzle as well, that got the conversation going to where there's so much focus on water and so much interest from public all the way up to elected officials. It's really a unique situation we're in, where there's so many people focused on planning for our water future. And I think that brought us into the 2022 session, where we knew that the governor had stressed some of his initiatives that he wanted to see in water, and then working closely with the legislature to see what bills came about. And as I mentioned, there were a lot of them, but I think I'm only going to highlight a few of them today, and I know Mark is going to highlight several others, and we'll hopefully not have too much overlap. House Bill 121, water conservation modifications. This is the one that would provide some funding to Division of Water Resources for turf replacement. And so the exciting thing for us was our director at the time, before the session, you have a chance to submit what we call building blocks, where you say, hey, we could use some additional funding for this, whether it's new employees or a program we want to implement. And she knew that turf replacement was going to be a topic, and she said, what if we got 1.5 million? That would be great. And we were surprised when the bill came out and it had $5 million for water resources for turf replacement in it. So the bill, it wasn't just focused on turf replacement, though. It actually has a lot of the focus on government facilities. And we were pleased to see that, because we we hear all of that feedback of us promoting this conservation message, and then people saying, but every time I drive past this government facility or the Capitol or whatever it might be, there's sprinklers are on in the rain, and you guys are telling us to conserve, but we're not seeing you do it. We like that this bill kind of addresses that head on. So for state agencies, they are required to reduce their outdoor water use by 5% next year and by 25% by the end of 2026. So some good goals, to get the 25% over the next 3 years. That'll be a challenge. And the board or the Division of Water Resources will be a resource as state agencies look at how could we do that. We want to be able to help them to plan and look at ways that they could hopefully meet that goal. Then we get to the section about the $5 million, and it was interesting that there wasn't a whole lot of direction. It says, subject to a $5 million aggregate annual cap, the division may provide an incentive to an owner, and the owner means an owner of grass, and so it could be potentially, a homeowner or even a commercial or industrial owner, as long as they own grass, from land owned by the owner, and replace the lawn or turf with drought-resistant landscaping. And then a little bit later, it says that the incentive cannot be greater than 50% of the total cost of replacing the lawn with drought-resistant landscaping. So not a lot of information. Then it has that famous line in there that a lot of bills have, and the division can make rules about this. And so we're kind of wrestling with this, realizing there's some of the water conservancy districts in the state that already have programs in place for doing a turf replacement. Some of it's like a certain amount of money per square foot. There's also, we're pushing the Flip Your Strip program, where we encourage, those that have the grass park strip in front of their lawns to say, hey, just removing that is a great step, and putting in drought resistant landscaping, which is what's shown in the picture here. You see someone's park strip that used to have lawn in it and now has some water-wise plants, and it's going to be more efficient to water and I would say more beautiful. So we are working on this, and we don't have a lot of answers right now. We're getting calls saying, when can I apply for this incentive? When can I apply for this? We're right now targeting fall, because we're going to need time to work with the districts, come up with a plan that makes sense, and then implement the rules to get this in place. So right now we're encouraging people, watch the website, and fall is our target. Hopefully it could be sooner, because we know there's a lot of interest in this, and would be a great year for people to be able to do some turf and landscape changes. And I guess I should be checking if I'm not seeing any questions pop up, but as I go, I guess let's see, there are 10 comments in the chat. Let's see. Nothing new. Okay. Yeah, if you do have questions as I go, I basically have one slide for each of the 3 or 4 bills that I'm going to talk about. And so if you have a question, feel free to just chime in. The next one I wanted to talk about, and now I've done something. There we go. 242, secondary water metering amendments. This one got our full attention because of the price tag, $200 million, and that was in addition to $50 million that had already been appropriated earlier in the year. So a total of $250 million for secondary metering. And that got our attention partly also because of the tight time frame. Because it's ARPA funding, it all has to be spent by the end of 2026. So we're looking at, the next 3.5 years needing to get $250 million out the door. The board has got experience with getting money out the door, but their normal annual budget is probably around $50 million of getting money out to projects and putting it to use. And we have a staff of 8 people in our project funding section. And so when we looked at this, thought, well, that's 5 times the money with the existing staff that's already doing all those regular projects. We're going to need some additional staff. So we asked for 5 employees to help us get this $250 million contracted and out the door. And so we're working on that to get these employees hired. The exciting thing is it's the legislature saying, here's a way that we know we can save a lot of water in the state, and also just know how much we're using, because that's one area where we've always had to guess. We don't have meters on most of the secondary systems in the state. There are some that are fully metered, and they should deserve some credit. But we have many systems that just aren't metered yet, and we don't know how much is being used. And so this will help us to know how much, help the owners themselves know how much am I using. And then also that resulting water conservation will help extend our supplies. So is there the legislature's way of saying, hey, let's throw a big chunk of money to see if we can get the state almost fully metered. So now the challenge sits with us as a division and as you with cities and towns to apply for this money. The application is live right now on our website. It is 2 or 3 pages to apply for this grant money. It would be a 70% grant, and that includes the purchase of the meters, installation of the meters, and if you need to do any work with the reading system, whether it be a telemetry system or a cell phone signal. And even it could be used if you don't already have a billing system in place, as far as being able to notify homeowners of how much they're using. That could be done through a mailer. It could also be setting up a website where people can get an email and then click and it takes them to the website and they can see how much water they're using. So there's options, but the application period closes May 15th. Question
online about the prior bill, I think, from Steve Hurd. Will potential grass owners be able to apply for incentives for turf replacement done prior to the fall when you expect to have the application ready? So I think the question is, will the funding be eligible for retroactive effort?
It's a great question. If I had to give my answer right now, I would say we typically don't do retroactive funding with the board. You know, if somebody comes to us and says, oh, we already did this project and now can we get money for it? We typically like to know upfront with an application, this is what we're going to do so that it can all be approved and then have so I would say, unfortunately, I don't know that we can plan for this to be retroactive. The bill is pretty clear in saying that the money is to be used for, and going back, this is back to the turf replacement, the $5 million, in the order that applicants apply. And so that was pretty clear in the legislation as well, that it'll be done in the order of application, and we'll need to be clear about when that period will be so that people will be aware of, oh, this is when to apply.
Gotcha. And then there's one more about HB 242 this time. From Ron Jorgensen, is there an applicability threshold for the HB 242 metering requirement? For example, all secondary or irrigation water systems included, or are smaller ones exempt?
So there are, interestingly, some exemptions in the bill, and systems that are located in class 5 and 6, let's see, 5th and 6th class counties can apply for an exemption if the cost to do secondary metering would exceed 25% of their annual operating budget. So that was an example of one possible exemption. There's another possible exemption if the water quality in the particular area is such that no metering company will warranty a meter due to maybe you've got some really bad water quality and nobody will warranty it. That would be a possible exemption. And then the third other possibility of an exemption was if your area is under a groundwater management plan that since 2006. And so we're going to look at those exemptions, and those would all be done by someone filing a letter with us. Otherwise, whether it be a small system, large system, as long as it is secondary pressurized irrigation, we would expect that everybody would be subject to needing to install meters. And the biggest question and confusion I think we've had on this is maybe individual homeowners contacting us saying, well, I know I've got secondary water and I don't have a meter. Do I need to apply? And we've had to explain, no, it's only the providers. So maybe if the city or town maintains their own secondary system, or a lot of times it's irrigation companies that have kind of been converted over from traditional irrigation to a pressurized secondary type system, they would be applying to us to get these funds to do the metering, not the individual homeowners. And that metering money is available. So we would encourage people to apply. This application period ends May 15th. We would then take all those applications, have the board award that money. And then if there's still money available, we would go to a second application period. And if needed, a third. But we want to make sure that we try to do that, especially over this next first first year and into next year, because that is when the legislature allowed us to give 70% grants. Another
Right.
question.
One more question for you from Carl White. It looks like HB 242 does not apply to canal water that is pressurized. Is that correct?
So that's an interesting, maybe at one point it was in a canal, but as long as at some point it becomes pressurized and goes into a pressurized system. So I know a lot of cities will have, like, say, a reservoir that feeds their system. And once it goes into a pressurized system, and if it's used for pressurized secondary water, then it would need to be metered at each home. I realize there's going to be intricacies and some exceptions where there's unique systems out there. We've already had one, we've had a few different entities contact us saying, how would it apply in our case? And so there is a email address as part of that application on our website, where if you have a question, feel free to contact us and we can try to help you understand if it applies in your exact case or not. But generally, as long as you have pressurized secondary water provided at each home, then that would need to be metered, as we understand, unless you meet one of the exemptions.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah. So that's something that we're going to be very busy with.
Chime in there really quick.
Yeah.
And I just want to point out a couple things really quick from the league's perspective. At our mid-year conference here in a couple of weeks, we will have an entire session dedicated to secondary water metering, and particularly lessons learned from those areas that have already done it. And then we plan on having a separate town hall really about the same thing, about just this one subject, sometime early in May. So Joel, we may have you come back and at least be present or talk to us again then. But we will be talking about secondary water very specifically just about that, not as part of a larger discussion in the next few weeks as this application period is underway.
Yeah, that sounds like a great idea, because it's a big topic, and we understand it can feel overwhelming, because you might say this system's been here since the 60s or the 70s, and now we have to go in and try to install these meters. The way we looked at it is, this is an opportunity to try to do as much as we can. I don't know that, well, I do know that we will not get every system in the state fully metered by the time this money expires in the end of 2026. But we want to just do as much as we can. So we're saying this is an opportunity for you to get a 70% grant, which has never been available before. The board doesn't do grants. We always do loans, as I mentioned, but this is one way that you can get a grant through the board, and to be able to get 70% of your project costs covered. It's a great deal. I would say jump on it and do as much as you can. And then we'll see where we're at in a few years. And I'm assuming this bill will probably be amended and addressed, saying, hey, this is where we are now. But it's an opportunity that I think we all know is the right thing to do as far as getting to know what our water use is in the state. I wanted to talk a little bit about House Bill 269, capital assets related to water. This bill encourages systems, both wastewater providers and water providers, wastewater service providers, to have a capital asset management plan. And again, that's something that we've seen some of the large conservancy districts do, and it can be quite an effort to document what are all of our capital assets. And the bill defines what a capital asset, and it says a significant investment or an essential component necessary to provide service. So it could be a facility, infrastructure, equipment, communications network. But knowing what those are, knowing what the lifespans of those are, so that you can be planning of saying, oh, we noticed that these pipes are probably nearing the end of their life, and we're going to need to at some point plan to replace that main line. Or this tank that we have is nearing the end of its useful life, and we're going to need to plan to replace this 3 million gallon storage tank with something probably larger. But it's getting people to hopefully look and know what their assets are, and to think about a possible needed replacement at some point. The bill also requires these providers to participate in surveys. So for the wastewater side, there's an EPA survey, 2022 clean water needs, that the bill requires providers to participate in, and then as well as a water provider survey that would come out either from drinking water or water resources. Now, what are the teeth in this? Do we have to do it? The teeth is if you plan to get funding from the state for a capital asset project. If any of those assets, let's say that water tank I talked about, if you plan to come to a state funding agency to get money to help replace it, that would be where we'd have to say, in order to get that funding, you have to make sure you have a capital asset plan. So that's the teeth in that bill. But hopefully, we think again that that's maybe not easy to do, but the right thing to do, to know what your assets are and what to plan for as for future needs. The last one I planned to touch on today was Senate Bill 89 water amendments. And this bill came from Senator Iwamoto and talked about the regional water conservation goals that I mentioned, and encouraging each municipality to set a goal as part of their water conservation plan. Systems are required to submit a water conservation plan every 5 years to our division. And as part of that, say you ought to have a goal in there of what conservation goal are you trying to achieve? And then you would need to either have it be in line with the regional goal for your area, or it could be trying to achieve greater conservation than that goal. And if it's less than that goal, just an explanation of why. And it could be something like, based on the water supplies that we have, we're setting a lower goal because for this reason, or due to climatic issues, but there could be some justifications why the goal might be lower. But having a goal in your conservation plan, we think would be helpful for each entity. So that was an interesting bill that ties directly into some of the work that we've done. With that, I'm going to say thank you, and if there's further questions, I'm not going anywhere, and there'll be some other bills that I think we can hear more on from Mark, and a couple that do involve water resources as well. But that's where I'll end, and I'll say thank you for the chance to be here.
Oh, okay, cool.
Right. Our next presenter should be no stranger to people with the League of Cities and Towns. Mark Stratford, who let me stop share really quick and I'll jump to the other one. Mark Stratford, who used to work for Ogden City and is an expert on water and has been extremely helpful as I've transitioned into my new job over the last few months dealing with water. But now works for Jordan Valley Conservancy District. So even though he left the cities and went somewhere else, we still asked him to come back and share his expertise. But Mark was key on so many of our efforts as we got ready for the legislative session. And so happy to turn the time over to him and listen to his expertise. So let me, I think, share again. Just fix the display here. Okay, should be good to go there. Thank you.
Great. Yeah, thank you. So I do want to say, for what it's worth, I mean, Jordan Valley still is interested in me being involved with the league on water issues. And so, not that my phone was ever bringing up in Ogden City with requests for information, but if you want to reach out to me at Jordan Valley Water, you can do that as well. And certainly I'll still want to be able to assist the league whenever possible on water related issues. And there was a question that came about Senate Bill 89 on just at the end of Joel's presentation that I thought would be easier for me to answer. And so I'll get to that in just a minute. So I started this off with the image that I saw on the website advertising today's meeting. And it's a beautiful picture of a nice green meadow with water spraying out of a sprinkler that's a pressurized sprinkler. And I thought to myself, maybe we could have had a slightly different picture, and Joel did a great job with images and showing us, what this looks like. But the truth is we're changing, right? We are transitioning to less grass. And I'm not being critical of league staff. That's a great picture, but just gave me a chance to kind of illustrate part of what I'll be talking about today and opportunities for people to really make a difference in water demand based on what's happening in their yards. And so this is all about the combination of land use planning and water planning. And Joel already kind of touched on the bad news for this year. I just have a couple of slides to illustrate this, if you haven't watched the news, you've been off on a trip for a long time or something. So this black line on this graph shows where we're at this year for what's called snow water equivalent, which is in the snowpack, how many inches of water is up there. And you can see that that black line is currently hovering right between red and yellow. So it's not the worst ever, because that would be the very bottom of the graph, but it's in a pretty bad place. What's interesting about this is it's kind of a story of the best of times and maybe not so much the best of times. On the left-hand side of the pictures, lots of green and blues, and this is what's called soil moisture. And you can see the entire state is really doing great for soil moisture compared to what it's normally at this time of year, which is a good thing. That means when snow melts, it's more likely to make it to a reservoir where then we can store it and use it, as opposed to getting absorbed by the soil. But on the right-hand side, you can see a different graph, which is that snow moisture broken up by region of the state. And so if you're in Escalante area or in Tooele, you are currently under, well under 50% of your normal or median amount of snow moisture. And not looking a whole lot of better in anywhere else except for maybe Beaver, which is still slightly below the median, still at 98%. And so the real question is, okay, well, what's going to happen with water storage this year? And on the right-hand side of this is something called a teacup diagram. That's something that the Bureau of Reclamation provides that shows us how full reservoirs are, and this one just happens to be along the Wasatch Front. They have other diagrams for other places. But the truth is, we're in a bad place because of the carryover from last year. There wasn't that much carryover. And then when you look at the left-hand side of this screen, you will see what they are forecasting for how much river runoff there will be. And again, most of the state, at least most of the Wasatch Front, and going along the I-15 corridor is under 60% of what the forecast is for runoff. And that's what feeds the reservoir. So that's why we are really so concerned, and why the legislature was so concerned about water, because we have back-to-back years with real challenging water supply situation. And you might have also heard on the news that Weaver Basin Water Conservancy District in particular is setting some fairly stringent standards this year. And so this was just posted today on KSL, their website. This is somebody in Layton. And I don't know if you can read the bottom of that or not, but it says, amid the state's ongoing drought, Weaver Basin Water Conservancy District announced its toughest water restrictions yet, prompting some homeowners to tear out their yards. And so the message is getting through, people are doing things. And then of course, Joel didn't really talk about the Great Salt Lake a whole bunch, although his graph was really awesome as far as showing inflows to the Great Salt Lake. And I'm not really going to talk about the Great Salt Lake either, except that it is an overriding interest that also drove legislation this year. And so I just pulled up two pictures. The one on the left is what the Great Salt Lake looked like in the year 2000. And now in 2020, you can see that it's struggling, and the lake is not something we really factored in the past in trying to figure out available water supplies and what we could do with the water that was there. Clearly, the lake is going to be an issue for those of us in northern Utah who are dealing with water. But regardless of whether you're in northern Utah or other areas that are not associated with the Great Salt Lake watershed, water conservation is not going to be going away. And so getting into actually how do we deal with water use planning and land use planning. And this has been ongoing for a few years, the idea that this needs to be addressed. And you'll notice I'm also referring to the same website that Joel did. And the Division of Water Resources did not pay me to include a bunch of stuff from their website on here, but you're going to see I used a lot of stuff from their webpage because they have been working on this for a couple of years. And you can see it's that same website, water.utah.gov. If you go to that website, there's a drop-down link called projects, and then underneath projects, it says integrated water and land planning, or the link on here shows what that is as well. And this was something that was completed, the phase one was completed last year, where Division of Water Resources had some money. They were able to go out and hire a consultant to start talking about what can a community do to address in their general plan how to be more efficient with water use. And this was just a quote that was included in that report. And the phase two of this, which is really exciting, will be where some cities, and if you're interested in participating, there'll be an email link later on, you'll see. But if you're interested in participating in some workshops, there's an opportunity to email and one so that you can get involved in workshops on integrating land use and water use in your general plan. So we're really good at planning as cities. We plan really well for land use, and water providers, whether it's done by a city or by a separate entity, are really good at water planning. We're just not always good at merging those two things together. And so this is where I wanted to talk about the question on Senate Bill 89 and a water conservation plan. You can see on the right-hand side, one of the very first thing I mentioned that water providers are supposed to do is prepare a water conservation plan. Senate Bill 89 does not apply to every city. It only applies to cities who are required to do a water conservation plan as part of their operation of their water utility. But if you're a city that does not do your own water, don't have a water enterprise fund or something in your city, Senate Bill 89 does not require you to do something. But what I'm going to talk about today, which is Senate Bill 110, does require us, everybody, cities and counties, to address water use in their general plan. So anyway, I'm not going to go through and talk about all of these. All I can say is that we're really good at plans. We need to be better at coordinating those plans together. And we're going to talk a little bit about how how the direction that Senate Bill 110 gave us is to do that. And so let's talk exactly about what the bill says. First of all, it requires any city that's a first through fourth class city. That means you're 10,000 population or above. And it also requires all counties to include a new element in their general plan. And this is called the water use and preservation element. And the bill says that you need to do this by the end of 2025. Hopefully, you're not going to wait that long to get into this. And I do want to mention one thing. I know that the legislature has asked cities to do a lot, and your planners are probably going crazy. We've got moderate and low income housing plans, and those were changed. And I think there's an upcoming seminar on that. You have stationary plans, which also has an upcoming webinar, and retail incentives, all of which require planners to do a lot of work. And so it's not all that welcome probably that I'm showing up and saying, hey, you need to make water use a really important part of what your planners are doing as well. And so trying to figure out how to juggle that is going to be difficult. But waiting is not a good idea on this water use element. And I'll talk a little bit, hopefully, about how that can work going forward. So what you're supposed to have in this new element is an analysis of the effect of permitted development or patterns of development on water demand and water infrastructure. So really all this is saying is, look at what you're telling people to do in your community today. Think about, if we build our community according to what our ordinances say now, what will that look like in terms of water use? And is that what we really want? It might have been what we wanted in 20 years ago or 25 years ago, but in the circumstances we're in today, with the knowledge that we're going to be doubling population and that water supplies are limited and that we're going to have these challenges, is that what we want our community to look like? The next thing is, how can we reduce water demand and per capita consumption for future development? Because obviously people are coming in and developing, putting in new homes, new manufacturing facilities. What can we do so that the new people coming in don't, make the same mistakes? That would suggests that we screwed up in the past, but that they don't have undue water demand going forward. And then thirdly, how can we reduce water demand and per capita consumption for existing development? So it's a different strategy about how you go back and address kind of the built environment. And then finally, what opportunities does the municipality, or if you're a county, does the county have to eliminate practices or conditions that waste water? This final element is a little bit different. The first three are all about your land use and your zoning code and maybe your subdivision code, and maybe even economic incentives. You know, who are you incentivizing to come and develop in your community? But the last point is really about how do you operate as an organization? Are you being as efficient as you can be or should be? And how can you be a better example? Which kind of goes back, the bill doesn't say anything, by the way, about that you're supposed to have a specific outcome. That was really important in the drafting of this, was even though it's a requirement to update your general plan, that you had the flexibility as an individual city or a county to figure out how you wanted to achieve these goals. But the state bill, Spendlove's bill that talked about state facilities and new facilities and how they would use grass, is a good example of something you could look at in saying, what can we do as a municipality or a county to change how we're operating? I'd also say, even though only first through fourth class cities are required by the bill to update their general plan, it would really be a great idea, even if you're a fifth class city or a town, to go through this same exercise. Some legislators were afraid that this was an undue burden on smaller communities. I think this is scalable. A small community doesn't have to go through the same level of intensity when it comes to doing this review as a really big city. And so I think it's easily within the reach of smaller communities to go through and update their general plans as well. They're just not required to by the statute. Okay, so what does the Planning Commission look at when they're preparing this new general plan element? And so they are supposed to consider, review, or consult with, first of all, they should consider the regional water conservation goals, which Joel's already referred to, and I'll take just a second in a minute to address a little bit more about that from the perspective of this bill. You should also be looking at a water conservation plan if you are a city that has a water conservation plan. If you don't have a water conservation plan, well, I'll get to that in just a minute. So also consider principles of sustainable landscaping, which we'll get to in a minute. And so this is what I was going to say. If you don't have a water conservation plan because you don't operate a public water utility, well, guess what? You have a public water system who provides you with water, your citizens. And so you are required to go talk to that public water system and have dialogue with them. They would love to talk to you about their system and what their system is designed for and how much water, you need to be providing them or how much they need to be providing you. And they will have a water conservation plan. But the problem for a water provider, they don't have land use authority. And so they frequently aren't in a position to do anything to make sure that that water conservation plan is implemented. They need your help. And so if you're communicating with them, then that will make a big difference in making sure that the land use side and the water use side are in sync when it comes to water projects. Counties are not required to consult with the public water system, mostly because generally there's lots and lots of public water systems within a county. And so it'd be difficult to say to the county, you have to talk to every single public water supplier in your entire county. I would still say, though, counties would be encouraged to at least reach out and talk to some of them or figure out who it makes sense to consult with as they are working on their general plan. And then finally, you should consider water demand reduction strategies, which are also described in the bill. So just a real brief additional statement about the regional water goals. The water goals use, what I was showing on the screen here is language from Senate Bill 89 versus language from Senate Bill 110. Both of them are coordinated in the fact that they require what's called per capita use. So you go out and you you look at the total amount of water that is being used within your municipality. So in Utah, the second bullet point, we count all treated water and secondary water and reuse water by all users, whether they're residential, commercial, institutional. And so the idea that Water Resources wants you to get to is to look at all water use within your geographic location and add that up and then divide it by your permanent population. That's how you get to gallons per person per capita or per capita per day. And then that is a way that you determine whether or not you're meeting these goals, because they're set based on per capita per day. And so the water provider is supposed to have water goals on a per capita basis. You should also be trying to use that same formula in your general plan and trying to figure out how you can reduce water usage based on a per capita per day amount. And the Division of Water Resources was also giving funding from this bill to hire an employee, which might not be the highest thing on their priority list, given trying to get $250 million out for irrigation, but to have an employee who can help consult with cities on this general plan issue. And my personal perspective, I don't think I've told Joel this, but I'll hear it right now, is that person's primary job should be helping cities understand what on earth is gallons per capita per day, how do we measure that? Because it is a little difficult, because you have to reach out to people outside of the city to get that information. If you don't run your irrigation system, you have to reach out to the secondary water provider to figure out what's going on there. If you have other people who are providing retail water, culinary water, you'll have to reach out to them to try to figure out how to integrate that information. And so I think that the Water Resources can be a big help in helping cities understand what that even means, because it's not in the normal course of business for planners. Okay, so let's talk about, it said you're supposed to look at principles of sustainable landscaping. Senate Bill 110 has and I'm not going to list everything that Senate Bill 110 had in there about these principles, but we're going to just talk about several of them. First of all, how do we reduce or limit the use of lawn or turf? This is a really significant issue. Lawn is very consumptive, and it's almost always watered with above ground sprinklers. We have a question.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. Lisa Zumpf asked, do second homes and hotel rooms count as part of the formula for average use?
They count as part of the formula in the sense that they use water. And so the water that they use is part of that number of total water use, but you do not count secondary home occupants as your permanent population. So clearly, this is one of the significant things in Senate Bill 89. Is originally that bill was drafted and said, we expect everybody to meet the state goal for your region. And the league pushed back a little bit on that and said, look, we need each entity to be able to decide what makes sense for them. If you're an area that has a really high industrial use of water and a low population, your gallons per capita per day are going to be higher, even though the people who live in your town might be doing a really great job with their water use. So in determining that number, no, secondary population or people who come and work in your community don't count in coming up with that number. And so you're going to just have to look at that and say, well, what can we do to be as efficient in our situation as possible? And so a city can, or I keep saying city, it's the water provider. But assuming that the city's the water provider, if you're a city that's the water provider, you can adopt a goal that is less aggressive than the state goals, but you need to justify that. You need to say, because of this situation in our community, we don't think it's reasonable that we're going to be able to meet the state goal, so we're going to have a little bit of a different goal. So no, those people don't count.
One more.
Yes.
One more question for you on SB 89 from Mayor Dandoy. If a city sells off excess culinary water to another city, is the city considered a retail water supplier?
There's probably two answers to that question. If you're selling a portion of your water to another water entity, that's a wholesale transaction. What makes you a retail water provider is that you provide culinary water to an end user in your city. So anybody who has end users, people who pay you a monthly bill for water to their home or business, you're a retail water supplier. If that's passing through, then you're a wholesale. That's considered wholesale. You don't actually count that wholesale water as part of your calculations. That would be up to that other water provider to use that in their calculations. So yes, you are probably still a retail water provider because you're probably providing water to your citizens, but that water is not part of your retail system.
Gotcha.
Hopefully that's getting to Mayor Dandoy's question.
Thanks, Mark.
Okay, so sustainable landscaping. First of all, how do we reduce the use of lawn or turf? Second of all, how do we promote site-specific landscaping design that decreases stormwater runoff or runoff of water used for irrigation? Thirdly, how do we preserve healthy trees that have a reasonable water requirement or are resistant to dry soil conditions? And how do we use irrigation systems, including drip irrigation, best adapted to providing the optimal amount of water to the plants being irrigated? So this goes back to the point I was starting to make at the beginning. Any of these above ground spray heads that have water coming out of them are inherently inefficient because they lead to increased evaporation of water. That water spraying out is in the atmosphere, it goes away. With grass, that's really how we irrigate grass. There are some people who have tried to use drip irrigation or other kind of underground systems for grass. They just don't work super well, and I don't know that our population is educated on how to maintain those systems, which is why the reduction of grass is so important, because it doesn't do any good to reduce grass and then have spray heads watering flower gardens, because you're still losing the water through evaporation. What we really want to have happen is flower gardens and other kinds of shrub areas being irrigated with drip irrigation systems. And that's where the water savings comes from. I mean, we have less water going through that system, but in addition to that, we have reduced evapotranspiration. And so that's one of the goals that you should be looking at, is how do we reduce the way that people are watering. So the other bill that I was going to talk about is House Bill 282. And we talked about this in the league quite a bit. If you recall, if you were paying attention during the session, there was originally a bill by Representative Ward that basically just said people can kind of do whatever they want as long as they're feeling good about water-wise landscaping. That bill didn't go anywhere, but House Bill 282 did move forward, and it defined water-wise landscaping this way, which is similar to, but slightly different than Senate Bill 110, but they really do overlap. So it means any or all of the following: installation of plant materials suited to the microclimate and soil conditions that can remain healthy with minimal irrigation once established, or be maintained without the use of overhead spray irrigation. So that's getting to that issue of how are we watering and how much are we watering. Also, the use of water for outdoor irrigation through proper and efficient irrigation design and water application, or finally, use of other landscape design features that minimize the need of the landscape for supplemental water for irrigation, or reduce the landscape area dedicated to lawn or turf. So you can see this is talking about how much grass is there and what else are we doing. And originally, yes, another question.
Another question from Mayor Dandoy. Regarding HB 282, could the landowner replace the lawn landscape with cement to be compliant with the bill if they're minimizing the need for supplemental water?
Okay, so this is what I really want to focus on, is what do you want people in your community to do? Because an important part of House Bill 282, and I think we'll get to this slide in just a minute, but I'll talk about it for a minute right now, is that House Bill 282 reinforces that even though you're not allowed to prohibit water-wise landscaping, you can still require somebody to come to the city and get a permit. Because quite honestly, you probably don't want people just doing their very own thing on replacement of landscaping. Because if somebody goes and puts in hardscape everywhere that they had landscaping before, that is not going to actually be good, I don't think, for the looks of your community or really for how your community operates. That's going to lead to more water running off into the street, more stormwater, and more heat, right? You're not going to have any vegetation there. And so one of the concerns I've had is I've seen advertisements during the drought is some companies kind of encouraging people, you just need to take out all of your landscaping and replace it with 100% rocks. That's probably not what you want as a community. And so it's really important that you say to your citizens, come to us and talk to us. See what our city requires for landscaping standards that are consistent with water-wise landscaping. And if you don't have an ordinance that's consistent with water-wise landscaping, you need to figure out how to start on that process as soon as possible. Get them to come in and talk to your planners so that you can advise them about what is the best way of doing that. So certainly some hard surface improvements would be appropriate. But probably there's some percentage there, though, that you're going to want to have. So in the backyard, if you looked at one of the first pictures I showed, there was like a concrete patio, right? So yeah, that's great. But a concrete front yard or 100% rock front yard without any vegetation all is not what you want. I think I answered the question. I'm not sure if I did. Hopefully I did. But what I wanted to really emphasize was encourage your citizens to come talk to you. If you're a small city and you don't have somebody on staff who can do that, maybe you can partner with your water provider to have a combined person who does that. I know that the water districts, Jordan Valley and others, might be looking at an opportunity to provide cities so that there's some consistency, or you don't have to hire, if you're a smaller city, you don't have to hire somebody new to do this. Okay, so mandatory recommendations. These are things that you must include when you complete the general plan, this new general plan element. First of all, water conservation policies to be determined by the municipality or county. This is just in response to the idea that what are you going to do in your operations to conserve water? Second thing that you must have are landscaping options within a public street for current and future development that do not require the use of lawn or turf in a park strip. Now, you might actually want to go further than this. You might want to prohibit use of grass in the park strip. In fact, where I work now, Jordan Valley, they very much encourage the people that they provide water to, the land use authorities, to require that you not use grass in the park strip. But you can't force people to use lawn. And House Bill 282 also says the same thing. House Bill 282 says you cannot require grass in the park strip. And so if somebody does that and you go tell them that they got to take it out, you're going to be in violation of House Bill 282, as well as really basically also of Senate Bill 110. Third of all, mandatory recommendation is that the Planning Commission should be recommending changes to any ordinance that they find as part of their review that promotes the inefficient use of water. And this final one does not apply to everybody. Well, actually, no, it does apply to everybody who's required under the bill to do the plan. It doesn't apply to a fifth-class city, though, because we felt like it was too much of a work for them. But you're required to have the Planning Commission propose low water use landscaping standards for new commercial, industrial, or institutional development, common interest community, which would be a condominium association or PRUD, or a multifamily housing project, which is apartment buildings. So you should be doing this. Now, it might take you a while to get these design standards. That's okay, right? You've got till 2025 to get the plan done, but you can start incrementally doing pieces of these before 2025 while you're trying to get the rest of the plan together. The reason these will be very important is because, again, you're going to want those developers to be looking at you for your standards, so that you have something you can enforce. Now, this does not require you to adopt standards for single-family homes, but you certainly can. And I would recommend that you do. But frequently, when it comes to single-family homes, politically, there are sometimes some considerations there about how each community wants to address this. And so they weren't included as a mandate in the bill. But these are the four things that the general plan really has to include. It can include a whole bunch of other stuff that you might think is appropriate, but this is the minimum. This slide just talks about some of the things you can do as a municipality in your own operations. So you can make sure you have water efficient fixtures, including toilets that are more efficient than are required by federal law. Also, what are you going to do in landscaping and public areas? We've already talked about that. How are you going to operate your irrigation systems? And can you do a leak detection program, especially if you run a water system? Now, there was a bill on leak detection, House Bill 115. It didn't pass, but the idea of leak detection in general is a pretty good idea for you to look at as a water provider. Finally, a drought response plan. If you don't have a plan that says this is what we expect our citizens to do at certain levels of water restriction, or not water, of water availability, you should really think about adopting a plan that you can very clearly tell your residents, okay, we've determined that we're in a phase 1 water shortage. We expect you to do X, Y, and Z. And then if there's a phase 2 or a phase 3, what's going to happen at each one of those phases? So landscaping standards and park strips. This is more about House Bill 282. We've mostly talked about this. One thing you need to be aware of in House Bill 282, though, the second bullet point, that you cannot require a property owner to install or keep in place lawn or turf in an area with a width of less than 8 feet. The reason for this is because irrigation valves, or not valves, but sprinklers for grass, they spray about 8 feet. That's about the smallest area they can spray. And so if you have an area of less than 8 feet or less, it's really inefficient, because now not only do you have water spraying in the atmosphere, but you generally have water spraying into the street, or spraying onto a sidewalk, or spraying onto some other hard surface that's getting wasted. So not only can you not require people to have grass in their park strip, you also can't require them to have grass in areas that are less than 8 feet wide. And this is what I was starting to allude to before about what House Bill 282 specifically recognizes. It reinforces your authority as a city to do lots of important things. So you can require people to comply with the site plan review or other process before they install water-wise landscaping. You can still require people to maintain plant material in a healthy condition. And you can also require people to follow landscaping design requirements, including requirements that talk about what kind of mulch you want them to use. Some cities are concerned that mulch might run off into the street and get into the storm drain system, right? So you can say, hey, if it's important to us about what you're using as a mulch, you can restrict that. You can also impose vegetative coverage standards. So what I was getting back to about this question of, can people go in and put hard surface everywhere? Well, you might say, I don't want you to have grass everywhere, but I do want you to have 50% or whatever percent's appropriate of vegetative coverage, which is going to be shrubs or other kinds of flowers or things like that, other kinds of water efficient grasses maybe that you still want to make your city look nice. And also can restrict or prohibit the use of specific plant materials. So if there's types of things that you don't think should be in your city, you can restrict those. It's a question.
We've had a couple questions online asking for recommendations where people can find resources for these standards. I'm guessing you're about to cover that, but.
Well, this is an example of the website that Jordan Valley operates, jvwc.org. And public resources is the drop down, and at the very bottom talks about water efficiency standards. Now, Jordan Valley provides two different things. I don't know if they're both on their website. There's a model ordinance which you may not want to use at all. Okay, it might not be something that you like. But the water efficiency standards are much more straightforward. They're much more limited and really achievable by everybody. And so this is one resource, is the water efficiency standards. There are other resources out there, and I'll see if I can get to that slide in the last few minutes that I've got here. But water resources, what I was talking about at the beginning, that web page on water.utah.gov and going to integrating water and land planning, there's lots of resources there. Is a great place to look for that. This is just a quote from Jordan Valley in its water efficiency standards about what you can do. What I want to end with, and I'll see if I can get to this slide that talks a little bit about, or that has some of these other resources, is what I think are important suggestions for municipalities moving forward. First of all, even though Senate Bill 110 allows you till 2025 to implement, to change your general plan or adopt this new element, don't wait. Your citizens will get out in front of you and will start doing things that you might prefer they not do. So the sooner you can engage with them, the better. So this Senate Bill 110 allows you to control your destiny. It's important that if you don't already have some good standards, that you look at what can we do at least at the beginning to start implementing these, and how can we educate people? Because nothing is worse than a citizen who spends a bunch of money to rip out their park strip and then put in 100% rocks because they think they're doing the right thing, and then you show up and say, guess what? That's not what we want in our community. And so whatever you can do to outreach to citizens to say, look, this is what we want you to do, and how you can do it. And so educate them, whether that's through a website or through some kind of flyer or other kind of thing you send out with your water bill. Let them know that you want to engage with them, and then finally take incremental action. These final things or some things that I talked about at a legal seminar that we're not going to talk about right now. And I will say this though about landscaping, right? The video talked about landscaping. It is more expensive to put in new landscaping. If you are installing a landscaping with a contractor, brand new landscaping is about $23,000. Did I mess up something up here? All right. This information is a couple of years ago old, but the cost of installing water efficient landscaping is about $2,000 or $3,000 more. This issue about so that it costs a couple $1,000s more to do water efficient landscaping up front. Now, some entities, for example, Jordan Valley does provide some incentives for that. Technically, that does not qualify for the money that was given to Water Resources, because Water Resources was given money to replace existing landscaping as opposed to installing new landscaping. But you as a city might decide that you want to set aside some money to provide your own incentives, at the city level, that people can come apply for if they meet your standards, or not. The retrofitting is way harder because it's far more expensive, and so it'll be great for the state to have some rules. One of the rules I think the state needs to have, for example, is that before somebody gets money from the state to replace their landscaping, they should show that they've come to the city and gotten approval from the city so that it's consistent with the city ordinances. Let's see. Oh, no. I thought I had a slide that showed another resource for the integration. But if you have any desire to try and participate in these workshops of how to integrate water and land use planning, you can, or other questions. This is an email address, waterandland, all spelled out one word, at utah.gov, and that will go to the people inside of Water Resources who are working on this issue, and they can help you know if workshops will be available in your area and when. They won't be doing that for a couple of months, the soonest, but they'll be doing that over time. So, yeah, that's what Senate Bill 110 is all about. It's a great opportunity for us to lead from the front instead of being told by the legislature. Because my biggest concern when we go to the legislature is that they tell us, thou shalt not do this, and thou shalt do this, and thou shalt, right? They're going to kill us with 1,000 cuts. The whole goal with Senate Bill 110 is to say, what can we do as cities to be in front of this so the legislature doesn't have to micromanage our affairs? So I don't know if we have any other questions at that point, but.
It's Melinda Greenwood with Kaysville City. I realize this is a done deal, but here's my editorial comment. Like, I'm looking at all of this and the expectations and the resources that residents are going to expect of cities. And now I need to send my planners to horticultural and landscape architect school. I mean, this is, to me, it's mind blowing how much is going to be expected of us and with such small resources.
If you live in an area that has a large water conservancy district, Weber Basin, Jordan Valley, Central Utah, or Washington County, reach out to those individuals. Ask them to help you do this. This is why I wanted to emphasize, though, the incremental approach, right? It's a huge thing to bite off. And so just look at it and do it as you can. And that's all I can say, because it's something we've got to do. Okay, yeah, but it's a big lift for sure. And normally not something the league would be sponsoring, but there was just no way to avoid the inevitable train that was going to run us down.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, with so many of these bills, it was a question of bills were going to pass, bills were going to go through, and it was a question of how can we get the best deal that we could. And certainly, for example, Representative Wilcox's bill was a lot better than Ray Ward's bill when it came to landscaping. Looks like we have one more comment online, and then we'll close it up.
The question online was, is there a resource where cities can find a comparison or list of best practices of what other cities are doing already? If anybody knows of one.
I'm not. There's not a place right now where all of that is aggregated. But certainly as we keep going down this road, water is something we're going to have to talk about. Planning is something we're going to have to talk about. We'll continue to have workshops and see what resources we can provide, but nothing that really exists right now. All right, and with that, we'll thank Joel and Mark for being here. One reminder, if you were looking for the information that was presented in these trainings, you can go to our website, ulct.org, and the same place where you went to sign up for the training is going to be replaced with the recording of the training and the resources from these trainings. So this one won't be up immediately, but give it a couple of days, and you can go back to that same website and find those resources. As always, feel free to reach out to us as staff at the League. We're happy to either help you or get you in touch with the experts that can help you. And again, thank you to the two experts that were here today. One final reminder, there's 2 more trainings next week. Please go to the website. One on, I think we have moderate income housing plans and station area plans next week. I actually remember those. That's my win for the day. So thank you all for being here today. Please look forward to those future ones, and thanks for coming.